Hi everybody, this is Fred Bascuñana and I'm very lucky today because this is episode 2 of me having the chance to interview my guest, Mike Adams. Mike Adams is the author of 7 stories every salespeople must tell. And for those who know me, I went to study again back to the university a few years ago, neuroscience, and I'm also a big specialist and passionate about storytelling. And Mike is one of my masters. I love reading this guy, and also he's doing an amazing job to make it accessible to everybody. Mike, this is your turn. Let us know what did you find? What did you find out? What did you discover by studying neuroscience in relation with storytelling? Why was it so powerful helping you in your job?
Yeah, well, when I started to write the book, I was very interested in the question, why do stories work? Why do humans love stories so much? And the answers I got in the storytelling books that I read were not so good. You know, they were talking about emotions and the emotion centers, but they didn't really explain why. And my background is electrical engineering. I'm an electrical engineer. But also I've had a long-term interest. Before I became a salesperson, I was running neural networks. And I've had a long-term interest in artificial intelligence and neuroscience, in particular the science of the neocortex.
So as an engineer, you were very excited and stimulated about understanding how it works inside. What are the connections?
I want to know exactly how it works. And this is a big mystery, actually, still. We don't know a lot about how the brain works. But the neocortex was my particular interest. And if you hold your two fists together like this is about the size of your neocortex in two halves, exactly like that. And if you lay it flat, it's about the size of a dinner napkin and about 2 millimeters thick, 6 layers of 30 billion nerve cells. And all of your senses connect in at the bottom of the neocortex. So your vision.
All of our senses. Please stay with us with the senses, because you explained in your book that there are 8 senses. It's extremely interesting.
We have 8 sensory groups. So vision, smell, touch, hearing, and taste. Those are the 5 that you learnt at school. And then we have our balance system, our vestibular system, which gives us the orientation of our head and our balance. And then we have a sense called proprioception, which is where your body is in space, where your hand is relative to your body, that kind of thing. It's your body sense. And finally, we have a very important sense, which is called interoception. It's your internal body sense. And this is your feeling of your heart rate and your guts and your internal body. And our emotions actually are tied to this sense. If you cheated on an exam and you felt sick because you got caught, that feeling of sick is actually coming from your guts to your neocortex, and you're making in your neocortex that emotion of maybe regret that is coming from your internal body sense. So what the neocortex is doing is memorizing sequences in the environment, the outside environment and your internal environment, and then predicting what will happen next. And you're trying to predict right now what I will say next, but you're also trying to predict what you might see next and how you might feel next.
And by the way, what you're telling us, which is extremely interesting, is that the neocortex is constantly working at predicting what is about to happen, because it's a matter. It used to be in the past, and during the evolution, it used to be a matter of survival. Okay, so it's always making a synthesis of everything happens in order to determine patterns. That's why stories are in touch with this ability of the brain to construct patterns.
Exactly. Well, a story by definition, Frederic, is a sequence of events. And what your cortex is trying to do when somebody's telling a story is predict what will happen next. And stories by definition should be unpredictable, otherwise not a very good story. So your cortex will pay attention and try to predict what will happen next. Not only will it try to predict what you'll say next, but it'll try to predict what I might see if I was the character in your story and how I might feel. So it's really a multi-sensory experience. We hear a story, but we predict what we'll see, we predict how we will feel, we predict everything. We might even predict how something smells or tastes if you told me about something that you ate that you really enjoyed. So that's the power of storytelling, is we pay attention because we want to know what's going to happen next. And we get the experience of the character in the story. It's as if we had that experience ourselves. And you know, most of what we know, most of what we ever learnt was not our own personal experience. It was the experience of somebody else that we heard their story. So stories are fantastic for that.
And by the way, Mike, it is quite obvious for anyone who has an interest for the building of a civilization that since the very early age of mankind being able just to talk, the first thing that we shared, coming from the elderly to the younger people, was through myths, legends, stories, in order to prepare us for survival, because the first stories and the myths were meant to give us guidelines in order to prepare for life. Okay, I read another author. It would be too long parenthesis, but just in a nutshell, she wrote about storytelling and neuroscience, and she said also that our brain was kind of loving stories because we were looking at experiencing the cost of emotion. If somebody else is experiencing a strong emotion, we learn from the story, not only something from the outside world, somebody else who has experienced something in another continent, okay? There's a universal reach into a story that speaks to me because it teaches something to me about me when I receive the story, and that's why we are so fond of it.
Yeah, that's right. And emotions are critically important because we are trying to sense the emotion of the person telling the story, and we have the ability to also feel the emotion of the person telling the story. That's called empathy. Most people have that ability. And our memories work best when they're tied to strong emotions. Particularly if we're afraid, we remember very well situations where there was a high emotion. So it's true that stories with high emotion are the most memorable stories.
Oh, I may have a takeaway for you that you might like. I don't know if you knew that if you told us that you are an engineer and you were fascinated by the way the brain works and how it is wired. Something very interesting. If you compare your brain to a computer, you can make an equivalence between the activity of my consciousness and this consciousness related to my neural network while I'm talking to you, and in equivalence from a computer point of view, I am processing while I am talking with you something that's around 2000 bytes per minute. But did you know, given everything you explained to us about the 8 senses, what's the exact amount of data that the brain, the neocortex, is processing, from a subconscious side that I am not aware of? Do you have an idea as compared with the 2000 bytes a minute? Have you heard about it? Because the figure is amazing.
I don't know the figure, but I do know that the human brain is a more sophisticated computer than any computer we've built yet. And to understand that, the synapse.
So let me tell you, because there is a proof that's been brought by several neuroscientists. So I repeat, 2000 bytes a minute, that's the equivalent, from computing point of view, of my brain processing this conversation that I'm aware of. Well, the rest of my body, the rest of the activities coming from outside, the senses, etc., this represents 400 billion bytes of information per minute. Do you see the gap? It's just amazing. So what you're saying is all the more true, that we need to sort of make many connections, and the main activity of the brain is filtering out the useless information, So we are reaching the limit of, and I heard your timer, because we are reaching the limit of the 10 minutes of LinkedIn. So in the episode 3, we will talk about how to tell great stories, and teach them, by the way. Okay. See you in a bit.